Got to start with the simple question: who runs Britain?
Well, what I'm arguing in this book is that we've essentially got a new elite graduate class that tends to live in the big cities and the university towns, which tends to lean left on cultural and identity questions, and which over the last 10 years or so has been really becoming even more socially liberal, more radically progressive, embracing sort of woke ideology and so on, partly in response to things like Brexit, Donald Trump, and those political rebellions of the last decade. And if you look at our media class, creative industries, cultural institutions, universities, House of Commons, you can really see this new elite grouping extending its influence, and it's visible, Laurence, both in the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. I'm not just taking a pop at the left with this book. What I'm saying is, in many institutions now, you can see that they're disproportionately dominated by this group, and I think that's a real problem, which is why I wrote this book.
And they also disproportionately unrepresentative of what your average punter thinks. So why are they going down this path of hyperliberalism against the views of essentially the electorate?
Yeah, so basically, I argue that there's basically been a political and cultural revolution in the country really since the 1980s, and that was really defined by three things. First was the embrace of hyperglobalization, putting the interests of big business ahead of the wider national community. The second was mass immigration, basically rebuilding Britain's political economy around importing cheap migrant labour. Again, that served the interests of business, and it chimed really nicely with the values of the new elite, who are much more socially liberal and cosmopolitan. And thirdly, it involved hollowing out Britain's national democracy, essentially pushing decisions away from ordinary voters so that they couldn't really exert any meaningful influence over the decisions that were affecting their daily lives. And really, this revolution lost touch with specific groups in Britain. It lost touch with lots of working class voters, lots of people who might not have passed through the elite institutions, and also older voters, and many of those who live outside of the big cities and the university towns. And this has become especially problematic, Laurence, because, as politics has shifted now. We're not just talking about economics. We're not just talking about public services. We're talking about migration, gender, cancel culture, political correctness, our history, our identity, who we are as a people, as a country. And it's on that cultural terrain that these divides between the new elite and the rest of the country have become very sharp. And my argument, at least, is they're not just here now, but they're going to be with us for years and decades to come.
And it's almost sort of slightly terrifying if you look at some of the cultural issues that we're facing as a country. We've inherited this incredible cultural heritage, and it seems to be that this elite class and those heads of universities and heads of galleries and various are trying to decolonize it is their word, but actually it's taking our rich cultural heritage and destroying it and dragging everything down in a sort of slightly what one would associate with cultural Marxism, I suppose. Is there? You're saying this is going to get worse? It's not. We're not at a turning point yet.
Well, the first thing to say is this has been a long time coming. So really, my book is drawing on, earlier writing by people like Daniel Bell, who talked in the 1970s about the rise of what he called the new adversary culture, which is basically the rise of a new professional managerial elite, very different from the old elite. The old elite were sort of, coming from the aristocracy, inherited titles, wealth, but crucially, on cultural issues, the old elite often leaned to the right. They were often quite culturally conservative. They believed in the institutions, they believed in the nation. They had a very different outlook from this new left-leaning elite. But if you look at generally how things have been evolving since the 1970s, this group has not just become skeptical of the things that have traditionally held us together, like our shared identity and our culture. But they've also, I would argue, begun to repudiate that inheritance. They've begun to basically try and derive status for themselves and among their elite group by repudiating our shared history and identity and culture. Sir Roger Scruton, the conservative philosopher, once referred to this as the rise of oikophobia, the rise of a sort of hatred of where you come from, a denial of your home. Daniel Bell, Christopher Lasch, Michael Lind, many other academics over the years and thinkers have pointed to this group, and they've said, look, actually, one of the hallmarks of the new elite is that they simply feel much less attached to our national community and our home than other groups. And in this book, I'm perhaps taking that a bit further in saying that within the new elite, there are these radical progressives, about 15% of Britain, who don't just dislike the country, but I think they actively have a deep hatred, actually, of their national identity. It's a source of shame and embarrassment for them, and they're obsessed with the idea that Britain is institutionally racist, plagued by what happened centuries ago. So I think we are in a new moment, actually, today, Laurence, and I think this moment is going to be with us for a long while to come.